Today, we are going to trace the incredible 2,500-year journey of a single idea, Buddhism. And let me tell you, it's a wild story of revolution, transformation, and, well, one of history's great puzzles. We're going to explore how a spiritual path born in India ended up shaping almost all of Asia. So here's the central question, the big paradox that kicks this all off. How on earth did a spiritual tradition that fundamentally shaped a continent just fade away in the very place it began? It's a real head-scratcher, and to get our heads around it, we have to go right back to the start. All right, let's set the scene. We're in the 6th century BCE. Ancient India is going through this period of huge social and intellectual change. It was, you could say, the perfect fertile ground for a truly revolutionary new idea to take root. And that idea was Buddhism. It was founded by a prince, Siddhartha Gautama, who we now know as the Buddha. At its heart, it was a really practical approach to a universal problem. How do we understand and end suffering? It was a personal quest for enlightenment. Now, you have to understand, this idea didn't just pop up out of nowhere. There was a lot of discontent at the time with these super complex rituals and the really strict social hierarchy of the caste system. So when this new path came along, it spread like wildfire, especially with merchants and artisans. So what was the secret sauce? Why did it catch on so fast? Well, it was really a perfect storm of factors. First, it was radically egalitarian. I mean, anyone, no matter their caste, could join. The teachings themselves were profound, and here's a key detail. They were taught in Pali, the common language, not the elite Sanskrit that only priests understood. Then you have the Sangha, the monastic order, which created this powerful network for spreading the message. And it didn't hurt that they got backing from some very powerful rulers. But here's the thing about any powerful idea. As it grows, it also changes. After the Buddha's death, people started to interpret his teachings differently, and pretty soon, that one single path began to splinter into many. And this didn't happen centuries later. We're talking pretty early on. There were disagreements over rules for monks and some really deep philosophical points that led to the first big split. And this really set the stage for all the different schools of thought that would come later. This brings us to a really crucial fork in the road, where two major paths emerged. On one side, you have Theravada, the path of the elders. This is the more conservative, orthodox school focused on your own personal liberation. The ideal figure here is the Arhat, someone who achieves nirvana for themselves. Then, on the other side, you have Mahayana, the greater vehicle. This path is way more inclusive, and its ideal figure, the Bodhisattva, would completely change the game. Just think about that for a second. The Bodhisattva ideal introduces this incredibly powerful focus on universal compassion, the idea that your own enlightenment isn't truly complete until every other being is also free. This was a totally revolutionary spiritual concept. And the branching out didn't stop there. From that Mahayana trunk, even more schools sprouted as the idea adapted to new cultures. In Tibet, you get the esoteric Vajrayana, or the diamond vehicle, and in East Asia, the meditative practice of Zen really takes root. Okay, so this diversification, the splitting and adapting, was absolutely key to Buddhism's next great chapter, its journey out of India and across the entire continent of Asia. So the first big push was southward. The great emperor Ashoka was a major player here. He sent missions that established Theravada Buddhism in places like Sri Lanka and Thailand, and it's still thriving there to this day. Then you have this other massive wave moving east. Mahayana Buddhism basically hitched a ride with the caravans on the famous Silk Road, and as it moved into new lands like China, it didn't just replace what was there. It wove itself into the local fabric, blending with Taoism and Confucianism to create totally new and unique forms. And the third great journey was north, high up into the Himalayas. Here, the Vajrayana school merged with local traditions to create the incredibly profound and complex system we know as Tibetan Buddhism. So you see the picture, right? Buddhism is becoming a true world religion. It's taking over Asia. But back home, something really strange was happening. The idea was starting to fade from the very land where it was born, which brings us right back to that central puzzle.
So what happened? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was a perfect storm. Internally, the monasteries started to get really wealthy. a bit hierarchical, and they lost that radical revolutionary edge they once had. And externally, they faced a double threat. They lost their royal funding to a resurgent Hinduism, and they suffered a series of devastating invasions that struck at the very heart of their communities.
So the first big blow was, funnily enough, assimilation. Hinduism went through its own kind of reformation, and it absorbed key Buddhist ideas like nonviolence. And then, in what you could call a masterstroke of religious strategy, it reframed the Buddha himself as just another incarnation of the Hindu god Vishnu. But the decisive blow, the final knockout punch, was physical destruction. Wave after wave of invasions, especially by Turkic groups around the 12th century, absolutely decimated the great monastic universities like Nalanda. These places were the institutional heart of Buddhism in India, and without them, it just couldn't survive. And just like that, by about the year 1200, the story of Buddhism in India was pretty much over. An idea that had literally reshaped a continent had become a ghost in its own home. And this whole saga leaves us with one final, really fascinating question. The story of Buddhism is just a powerful case study in how ideas are born, how they have to change and adapt to survive, and how sometimes their greatest success abroad can happen at the exact same time they're disappearing at home. So what does this incredible journey tell us about the very nature of culture and belief itself? That's a question worth thinking about.